Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of The Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 15th of March. So coming to the first article, an abhorrent and unjust device. Now the context here is with regards to some judgments that the Supreme Court has recently given on the issue of death penalty. Now you should know that three cases are what have been mentioned in the editorial that the Supreme Court has examined in the month of March itself. In two of those cases, the Supreme Court has declared that the convicts were not guilty. They have been set free. And in one case, the Supreme Court has upheld the death penalty. Now, one of those cases is what we had discussed in the past also, which is the Ankush Maruti Shinde case. In that case, there were 6 people who had been given a death penalty. One of them was a juvenile, and these 6 people belonged to a nomadic tribe. So there also we had discussed the issues that are related to allowing or retention of death penalty in India. And this is an article that is in similar light. So coming to the issues, the first issue is that of death penalty being arbitrary. Now here the editorial discusses that what is important in any criminal law is that precision is something that should be there. If criminal law is lacking any particular precision, then decisions often become arbitrary, and this is what has happened in the case of death penalty, that because there is no stringent law or no written norms as to when death penalty is what is to be given, this law is something that is used arbitrarily, where the lower court sometimes give death penalty and then the Supreme Court is actually setting free those people who are on death row under death penalty. And similarly, in some cases where the lower courts have not issued any charges, in those cases, the Supreme Court frames death penalty. So these are the cases that keep coming, and there is a lot of arbitrariness in the entire judiciary vis-a-vis death penalty. So that is the first issue which has been analyzed. The second issue is with regards to the rights of the death row convicts. Now here you should know that the Supreme Court itself has championed the rights of the death row convicts. The Supreme Court has said that making them wait for death penalty is somehow perpetuating the fear of death on them, which is something that is akin to torture on them. Now you should know that the death row convicts have a right that if there is a delay by the president in deciding upon the clemency or mercy, then this is what is a valid ground for commutation of death penalty, is what has been declared by the Supreme Court. So some mercy towards death row convicts is what has been shown. Rather, their rights is what has been upheld by the Supreme Court. And in line with those rights, what becomes important is that a change in this law is what should be looked into, is what has been highlighted. The third issue is that of abortion of justice, or for that matter, miscarriage of justice. Now, what has happened is, in particular of this Ankush Maruti Shinde case, was that these people were on death row for 10 years. And later the Supreme Court has decided that they were not guilty of this crime. So this is somehow a miscarriage of justice. And if in any case this execution of death penalty is what would have been done, then this would have been an irreparable loss. Who would have been answerable to the lives of these people, and who at present is answerable for the 10 years that they have already waited and borne the torture of death penalty? One amongst them was a juvenile also. He was kept in solitary confinement for 10 years. So these are some issues which have been highlighted, that the judiciary is not free from making mistakes. Judiciary can also make mistakes, and that, keeping in mind, death penalty has to be done away with, because if death penalty is something that has been given, then this mistake of judiciary becomes irreparable. So that is what has been highlighted. Next, what has been discussed is the rarest of the rare doctrine. Now this doctrine is what the judiciary of India uses when it gives the death penalty to a particular criminal. Now what is this about this doctrine? Doctrine is something that you should know. Now you should know that this doctrine came into existence in the year 1980. In a case it was decided. Also you should know that the section 302 of the IPC allows for death penalty for murderer, but this is something that can only be prescribed if the state can prove beyond doubt that the convict is incapable of being reformed or rehabilitated. So the state is what is duty bound to prove this, that if rehabilitation cannot be done, there is no scope of rehabilitation. Only in that particular case can this be accepted. But what is happening at present is that the state is failing to prove this, and even despite the fact that the state is failing to prove this, death penalty is something that is continuing. This case of 1980 was the Khushwinder Singh versus State of Punjab case, is something that you should know for your knowledge. So that is the entire idea behind the rarest of the rare doctrine, that it is not being used in a justified manner. Another issue that has been discussed is with regards to the victims of the system. Now, here the editorial discusses some very, very important points. Here the editorial says that a report was what was issued vis-a-vis death penalty in India. This was the Death Penalty India report, and this was released on the 6th of May 2016, and this was something that was carried out by the National Law University. Now, according to this report, 74% of the prisoners on a death row, of the 74 prisoners of the death row at the time of the study, were the economically and socially vulnerable group. 63% of these criminals who were on death row had been the primary and the sole earners of the family, and 60% of them were such who had not completed their secondary education, and in fact 23% of them were such who had not even gone to school once. So there is no doubt in the fact that these people who are doing these kind of crimes are somehow the victims of the system. Now, you should know, even in the Nirbhaya case, there was a lot of news about a juvenile who was a culprit of that particular case, and it was argued in the favor of that juvenile that this was a child who was working as a juvenile when he should be attending school. At that particular point of time, he was employed. He belonged to a poor family. It was in his family that he was seeing his mother being abused by his father. So what was happening was that the mindset of the child had developed in such a way that it led him to commit this crime, is what some human rights activists and some socialists had actually brought to the fore. So what you have to understand, that whenever a criminal is conducting a crime, is doing a particular crime, then in some cases the society is also somehow responsible, if especially the crime is what is done by a socially vulnerable group of people or economically vulnerable group of people. So in that case, it is the responsibility of the state also to prevent such events from happening. If students are not going to be given adequate education, if employment sources are not what are going to be provided to people in a country, then there is no doubt that some sections of the people can get diverted and motivated for crime. So some responsibility of the state is also what is there. And in light of this, what has been analyzed is that death penalty is something that should not be given in a modern state, because the state has also failed at some point. So that is the entire analysis. The other issue which has been discussed here is with regards to death penalty being a deterrent. Now, time and again it has been proven that death penalty never proves as a deterrent. It has never resulted in lowering of crime rates, and this is a global phenomenon. Many studies globally have proven this. A case of US, for instance, is what has been discussed, that in US there are several states, and in those states where death penalty is still applicable till today, the crime rate is higher than those states where death penalty has been done away with. So this clearly proves that this idea that if we give death penalty as a punishment, then it will deter the criminals, is something that is baseless. It cannot be proved. The other issue is with regards to the retention of death penalty. Now, this is a question that India needs to ask, that is there a need for India to retain death penalty? Here the editorial says that this undermines the country's moral principles and moral foundations. Ours is a country that has based on the ideology of Gandhiji, which was of non-violence. He has always talked about hating the sin, not the sinner, and he has always talked about reformation of individuals. So in such kind of light, is it applicable that India still is retaining death penalty, is what has been questioned. The other issue which has been discussed is that of irrational criteria. Now, as I discussed above also, that largely giving this death penalty is arbitrary. There is an irrational criteria, and this is what is going to result in dangerously irreversible decisions. I have included this word again, despite this being a repetitive concept, is for the key word. This irrational criteria is a key word. You can use it. The other issue is that of equality before law. This is something that is a fundamental right of every citizen of India. But what is happening is that the socially vulnerable, socio and economically vulnerable people are the ones who are not getting this opportunity, not getting this equality. A question in this particular case, where these 6 people were on death row for 10 years, is something that needs to be pondered upon. That had these 6 people been from an affluent section of the society, would their story have been the same? Definitely it would not have been the same, and this is what is proving that this fundamental right is something that is not being delivered. And in light of this, what is warranted is that at least we do away with the concept of death penalty, so that irreversible damages or irreversible punishments are something that are not given to those who are very, very vulnerable in the society. So that is what has been analyzed. The next issue is a very important one. This is an ethical issue also, that what has to be chosen, justice or vengeance. Now, even if we hold the criminals as soon as a crime has been committed, we give them adequate punishment, then justice is what should have been ensured. But what is the intent of our society? The intent is either to ensure justice, or is the society simply seeking vengeance, which is only going to be, which is only going to be calmed, for that matter, whenever the life of that criminal is what is taken. So this is a question that the society collectively has to ask itself, is what has been highlighted in the editorial. The topic is an important one. Death penalty has always been an important topic in UPSC. This is considered rather a static topic. These kind of issues, when they emerge, they only add to some examples aspect. So you should be well prepared with this one topic, and that is the relevance. Coming to the next article, From Revolution to Roses. Now, the context here is this article is what has been written in the context of the Women's Day, and how Women's Day should be about gender justice is what has been analyzed. Now, this article has a lot of historical aspect which is not important for us, so I have focused only on those issues which are important and relevant for UPSC. So coming to the first issue, which is that of tokenistic marketing. Now, this is a key word. Here the editorial is discussing that Women's Day at present is only about tempting discounts in saloons, in shoes and clothes and cosmetic shops, and complimentary cocktails that are given for women. So these kind of marketing strategy and gimmicks are what are being implemented on Women's Day, and core issues of and the core problems of women, for example, health issues of women, pay parity, sexual harassment, equal working conditions, all of these are something that get ignored in this kind of a propaganda that the marketing companies are implementing. So that is something that is important. The second issue is that of irony. Now, the editorial here discusses that often these companies that are giving these discounts have to look into themselves, that are these companies that are working for women's rights within their own companies, are there equal representation for women, is there pay parity for women? So these are some questions that are not answered or not looked into by companies themselves. Some examples of what have been given of McDonald's, for that matter Amazon and Oracle. In McDonald's, the issue that the editorial is discussing, that there is not an adequate pay parity amongst men and women. So this is why when McDonald's is what is giving a special offer for women, then this is a kind of an irony. Similar is the case with Amazon and Oracle also. That is what has been discussed. The third issue which has been discussed is the main aspect of this editorial. It talks about the origin of the Women's Day. Now, some basics is what becomes important, that it was the German socialist Zetkin, she was a feminist, who first gave the concept of a Women's Day in the year 1910, and later in the year, it was the March 8, the date March 8 is what was adopted based on the 1917 Russian Revolution. And in this particular revolution, a lot of women had participated, and after this revolution, these women had got their voting rights. However, this day, it was something that was acknowledged by the United Nations later in the year 1975. This was largely because this was a movement that had started as a socialist movement initially. As I told you, that it was the German socialist Zetkin who had started this. So this being a socialist movement, US was wary of this movement. So it was not up to 1975 that Women's Day was what was officially accepted by the United Nations. So that is the only historical aspect that is relevant and valid for us. The rest, a lot of it has been given in the editorial, which is not important. The next issue which has been discussed here is with regards to women in workforce. Now, this is something that we have been discussing continuously. So whenever you are discussing a topic on women, you must highlight this point, because this is something that is a pressing concern for India. Here the issue is that there is an alarming withdrawal of women from the workforce. Some data is what has been given, that in the year 2004 and 2005, it was 42.7%, and now this has been reduced to 23.3%. So this is one cause of concern, that why is the sudden withdrawal of women? One reason could be that women are spending more and more time in education. So that could be one short-term reason, but that is something that is not being expected. Rather, issues like huge pay gaps between men and women, unsafe working environment is what has been credited to this withdrawal of women from the workforce. So that is something that has been highlighted. The other issue which has been highlighted here is with regards to the social representation of women. Now, what happens is that the editorial is discussing that even on Women's Day, a lot of such kind of messages of what spreads on WhatsApp and, for that matter, on other social media platforms, that how women do a lot for us and we should be thankful to them. But the issue that the editorial is discussing is that why are women always represented in their traditional roles as a mother, as a wife? Why is it that women are not being represented in their official roles is what is the question being asked here. That the representation of women in the society is what has to change. Only then will the true gender justice and women empowerment be achieved. So that is something that has been analyzed in this editorial, and these are the only points which I could extract in relevance for UPSC. So that's about this article. Coming to the next article, China's blocked. Now the context here is that China has blocked on listing of the Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar as a global terrorist in the UNSC. So this is a major setback for India. Now coming to the issues that are important, the first issue is that of setback to India's diplomatic strategy. This is something that is important because in the aftermath of the Pulwama attack, as a post-Pulwama attack, India's entire diplomatic strength was focused upon getting Masood Azhar registered as a global terrorist. But this is something that has not happened. This has been blocked by China. So definitely this is a setback to India. The second issue is with regards to the past cases. Now some history is what has been shared here. In the year 2008, after the Mumbai attacks, India first tried to attempt getting Masood Azhar the status of a global terrorist. This was at that time also blocked by China. Then again, India tried this in the year 2016 and 18 in the aftermath of the Pathankot attack. Again, China did not allow it, blocked it. And this is the third time that China has blocked the listing of Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar, and this is something that you should know as a scenario, for that matter, a sequence of events is what becomes important. So this is something that is relevant for us. The third issue is with regards to India-China relation. Now definitely this is something that is going to become a major irritant. This already was, and this is now going to be furthermore escalated in the aftermath of the Pulwama attack. Also, this gives us a reality check on the India-China relation. This is primarily because in the year 2018, the Wuhan summit between India and China was a very successful one. It was believed that the relations between the two countries are going to improve after this summit. But India does need to have a reality check that whenever it comes to the question of Pakistan, India and China are definitely not on the same page, and China's interests in Pakistan are much higher for it to favor India against Pakistan. So that is one reality check. The other issue which has been discussed in the editorial is with regards to the future courses of action. Now it is being suggested here that should India let go of this, or for that matter, should India take a strict stance against China, or should India try and persuade China even further? So these are some probabilities which have been enumerated. We cannot quote such kind of probabilities in our answers. That is because this is something that has not happened and this is not a government stand. So that is why I would suggest that avoid using such futuristic analysis. But definitely I have mentioned it because it has been mentioned in the editorial. The next issue which is important is with regards to the UNSC listing itself. Now here the editorial is discussing that even in the past where some of the terrorists have been listed by the UNSC as global terrorists, in that case also there has not been an effective enforcement of this listing. The leaders often remain free, they often remain unencumbered. So when this listing is not resulting in any check on the global terrorists, or for that matter on such kind of leaders, then what is the point of India putting so much effort is what has been questioned. This could be akin to something like the grapes are sour, but this is something that is time and again coming in the editorial, that what is important for India is to focus on its counter-terrorist strategy rather than pushing its force in getting this UNSC listing for Masood Azhar, and this is something that often results in embarrassment for India also. So India should not focus on this particular issue is what has been suggested, because not much impact is what is going to be gained even if Masood Azhar is listed as a global terrorist. So that is the entire analysis of this particular issue. This action by China becomes important vis-a-vis India-Pakistan relation, also India-China relation. So that is going to be the relevant. And that's all for today's discussion. I thank you all for watching this video.